Hello and welcome to Homecoming 2021. It's an honor to be here. My name is Jessica Drew de Paz. And first and foremost, I'm a former student at UC Irvine, and also I have worked here for 20 years. So it's a pleasure to be here with you. I'm a director of Mindfulness Services at the Susan Samueli Integrative Health Institute. I'm also a clinical psychologist, and I have taught mindfulness to youth for over the past decade. So I will be working some of that information into this presentation as well. And the title is Finding Light in Dark Times, Mindfulness and the Power of Presence. But before we get into finding light, I thought I would do a very quick recap of the past year. And I won't belabor it because I know we are still living it in real time. But we kicked off 2020 with a COVID-19 pandemic that literally changed life as we knew it and also resulted in a massive recession. We witnessed many anti-Black acts, which gave rise to Black Lives Matter protests. All of this amidst a backdrop of climate change that's pretty much impacting everyone on the planet in different ways. And also, we have been faced with the most divided presidential election of our times. And so this has been a lot for all of us to be experiencing all at once. And I just wanted to bring up a chart of a typical emotional phases following a disaster. And this is just for one disaster, that sometimes when a disaster happens, there might be, a pre-disaster period and then the impact and then we have effects after that. And you can see the bar on the left hand gives emotional highs and emotional lows. So, if we just take COVID, there was a bit of a warning for that. And then the impact where we all almost a year ago just had to go on kind of lockdown in our houses. The honeymoon period might be the period for me where I was deciding this was the time I was going to learn to cook and get fit and, make that sourdough bread, all of which really didn't happen. And then there's so many other things that did happen for all of us, which really leads to many emotional lows, disillusionment. You can see here we're coming up on the anniversary. We're really still in the midst of this. And this is just for one type of disaster, and we have faced multiple disasters. And so, as you might imagine, and you probably are very well aware, there's been a huge impact on mental health around the world. In our country, the Center for Disease Control did a survey several months ago and found that anxiety has tripled, depression nearly quadrupled. And there's also, they're really looking too at different age groups and finding a huge impact, not only on all of us, but especially on youth too. So these are dark times. There's no denying that these are dark times. But as Martin Luther King once said, only in the darkness can you see the stars. And today I want to speak with you about my star, my guiding light, personally and professionally. And it actually happens to be on the list that the CDC recommends for mental health recommendations. So in addition to seeking mental health services when indicated, they recommend that we engage in healthy eating, physical activity, getting the recommended amount of sleep, and mindfulness. And so mindfulness is really, for me, just an area of passion in my life, personally and professionally. And there's so much evidence right now behind how this can support our well-being. And so I'd like to share this with you today. Some of you may already have your own practice of mindfulness. Maybe you've never heard of it before, really, or maybe you've heard of it, but you're not quite sure what it is. So, I'm really going to walk through what it is and how we can use this in our lives to support us. So mindfulness, it's an ancient practice that's been practiced for thousands of years around the world. And Dr. John Kabat-Zinn is really credited with bringing it into sort of mainstream Western society. And he defines mindfulness as paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. But what exactly should we be paying attention to? So there are many things that we can pay attention to that can be helpful to us. Our thoughts, our body, our emotions, our behavior, and also to cultivating a heart-centered existence. And so I'm going to start with paying attention to our thoughts. So here's one of my favorite images of mindfulness. We've got two people, they're in the exact same environment. They're walking toward 4 trees and a sun, right? The one on the left has their mind filled with so many thoughts, so many maybe worries. Maybe they're thinking about the pandemic or the recession, all of these things, maybe their to-do list. How are they managing work and homeschooling all at the same time, right? The one on the right sees the 4 trees and the sun, maybe feels the warmth of the sun on their skin, hears the birds. So one of them has their mind full and one of them is mindful. And this has an enormous impact on many other areas of our lives. But something I ask myself often throughout the day is, are my thoughts serving me? And usually my answer is no. Usually the places my thoughts go off to are not helping me. And before I learned mindfulness, I just followed my thoughts wherever they went. But once I learned it, I had a tool to interrupt that process when they were in a place that in places that weren't serving me. So we'll talk about how you can do that today. But I also wanted to share one of my favorite studies on mindfulness, which is out of Harvard. They are looking at mind wandering and happiness and finding that a wandering mind is an unhappy mind. So they developed an app called Track Your Happiness. They have thousands of people around the world in this study, and they ping them at various times of the day. They ask 3 questions. The first is, how do you feel right now? From very bad to very good. What are you doing? Are you working? Are you preparing food? What's your task? And are you thinking about something other than what you're currently doing? So either their mind is on their task at hand, but if their mind has wandered, they're asked follow-up questions. Did your mind go someplace unpleasant or pleasant or neutral? Well, some of the things they have found is, first, people's minds are wandering nearly 50% of the time. So almost half of the time, we are not living our current life in front of us. We're remembering something that happened or planning for something in the future. We're not showing up in the one moment we can make a difference in our lives. People's minds often go to unpleasant places, which has a whole host of implications. But the most interesting part of this research to me was that even when people's minds go to pleasant places, their levels of happiness are rated highest when they're in the present moment, even compared to when it goes to pleasant places. And that's true even when they're doing what might be considered a boring task, like doing chores or driving in traffic. They actually rate their levels of happiness higher when they're focused on that task. And so there's a TED Talk on this. Matt Killingsworth says, if mind wandering were a slot machine, we would never want to play because it's not usually serving us. I mean, sometimes it is. Sometimes we need to learn a lesson from the past or make plans for the future. But a lot of times the places our minds go are not serving us. And that brings me to the next part of my guiding light, which is that we can also bring our attention to our body. So I'm sure you have heard of the stress response, this fight or flight stress response that is part of our survival, that we have this, that we, this is what allows us when there's a threat in front of us, that we, our heart beats faster, it pumps blood to our muscles and organs, our breathing changes, all of this in order to give us and our bodies the ability to respond to the stress, right? So if a car is coming at you, right, you are probably going to decide to flee that situation, but the adrenaline kicks in and all of these things are happening in your body in order to help you to jump out of the way of this car. But this stress response for many people is on all the time, even when we don't need it to save our lives. So and it can be triggered just by the things that we're thinking about. There's actually a professor at Stanford, Robert Sapolsky, who wrote the book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, right? And it's because once the threat has passed for them, once the lion has stopped chasing them, their stress is episodic. Then they go back to grazing in the savannah, and they're relaxed. But for people, we rehash things and keep them in the front of our minds, and it keeps us in this fight or flight, which is not good for us. But something wonderful about our bodies is that they don't just need to be passive recipients of stress. We can actually use our bodies to counter stress. And, one of the gateways into the present moment is through our senses. So I'd like to invite you all, if you would like to do a brief mindfulness exercise with me, I'd like to invite you to try this on, to bring our attention to our senses. And we can really begin by starting with our sense of sight. So I invite you to, maybe turn away from your computer and look at the space that you're in right now. Wherever you happen to be, just noticing, what's in the room, you might notice shapes or colors or lighting, and doing so without judgment too. So mindfulness is doing so non-judgmentally. So it's really just seeing things as they are. And if you like, you can close your eyes or take your gaze downward. And now shift your attention to your sense of hearing. So you might notice sounds nearby or sounds far away. And now bringing your attention to your body and your sense of touch. So you might notice the points of contact your body is making with your seat. You might notice your feet on the floor. You might feel the air on your skin or any other bodily sensations. And now taking a few moments to focus on your breath. So no need to change your breathing in any way, just noticing the sensations in your nose or your mouth as you inhale and exhale again and again. And if your mind wanders, just noticing that it did and gently guiding it back to your breath. And finally, noticing how you feel, how it was to ground yourself in the present moment through your body. Maybe you found it challenging to keep your mind from wandering, and maybe it was relaxing. Some people think they should achieve a particular state and feel concerned when they do not. But to quote Jon Kabat-Zinn, mindfulness is not about getting anywhere else. It's about being where you are and knowing it. So if your eyes are still closed, feel free to open them and bring them back to the screen. And we'll move on to the guiding light, and that we can also bring our attention to our emotions. When we pay attention to our emotions, we may notice perhaps that we've had a lot over the past year. I know I have. And we might also notice that in general, I think people have a tendency to gravitate toward emotions that we consider pleasant. Like if we're happy or relaxed, we want to cling to those. Those feel good. And a tendency to gravitate away from those that we deem unpleasant. So maybe if we're afraid or sad or angry, these don't feel as good. And so there's ways that we turn away from those by maybe picking up our devices, watching Netflix, right? Getting out the pint of ice cream, using substances. There's many ways that we turn away from our feelings that don't feel so good. But it's actually the act of turning toward these feelings and moving through them that helps us. I have a citation here for a study at UCLA that says putting feelings into words, which is called affect labeling, actually disrupts the amygdala. The amygdala is the part of our brain responsible for fight or flight. So when we're having a bad feeling, the very act of just labeling it, of giving it a name, is very significant and begins to change what's happening in our brain and what's happening in our bodies and how we process that emotion. So, in some ways, I know it's kind of going back to kindergarten, and I've had to go back to kindergarten myself and begin to, really sit with my emotions differently, really be with them. I read a book to the kids in kindergarten called Visiting Feelings. It's about feelings are visiting today, open your door and invite it to play, like let it come in and really sit with it and notice, what color is this feeling? What animal might it be? Like, what does it feel like? What does it sound like? Really letting it in. At the end of the book, I ask the kids, like, well, what if there's a knock on the door? And what if it's happiness? What should I do? And they say, you should let it in. And then I'll ask them, like, well, what if there's a knock on the door and it's anger? And a lot of the kids will say, keep it out. Don't let it in. Don't let it in. Well, why? Well, because you might hurt someone, right? So then we talk about how, well, actually, you can be angry and not hurt someone. And that, what about just like noticing that anger's here, or sadness, or let me just name an emotion that I feel like there's a collective grief around the world right now. Grief is here, right? What does grief feel like? Opening the door, noticing it, inviting it in, letting yourself sit with it, noticing where you feel it in your body, giving it that name. I see you, grief, like you're here, right? Letting yourself sit with it. I'm not ashamed to admit I've had a couple really big cries over the past year. And I have to say that letting that emotion out, naming it, feeling it in my body, letting it out, actually was the best medicine. I have also had my days where I had the ice cream instead. And for me, I know the best medicine is allowing myself to move through those emotions. So on that note of allow, I want to share one of my favorite poems by Donna Falls called Allow. There is no controlling life. Try corralling a lightning bolt containing a tornado. Dam a stream, and it will create a new channel. Resist, and the tide will sweep you off your feet. Allow, and grace will carry you to higher ground. The only safety lies in letting it all in, the wild and the weak, fear, fantasies, failures, and success. When loss rips off the doors of the heart, or sadness veils your vision with despair, practice becomes simply bearing the truth. In the choice to let go of your known way of being, the whole world is revealed to your new eyes. So practice becomes simply bearing the truth. We can also be mindful of our behavior. So something very interesting I've discovered in the past few years, or interesting to me, is there's a lot of studies actually on multitasking. And I think we live in this culture that really values multitasking. I actually recently hired an assistant, and I got many, many cover letters telling me what a great multitasker that they are. And the research is showing that we don't multitask. We can't really do that. We can't really have our attention on two things at one time. When we are maybe trying to multitask, what we're really doing is task switching, and our attention is going from one thing to the next and back to the other, sometimes very rapidly. But it's a task switching that's actually happening. And this particular study looks at the fact that it undermines our efficiency in all of the tasks. So we do less well at all of the tasks when we're multitasking. We would do them better when we can just do one at a time. And I know we can't always do that, right? We can't always do it, but when I am multitasking now, I kind of really reframe that and let myself know I am task switching and I am going to do each one less well. But when you can monotask, so if you're working on a document, right, try to, turn your phone off, turn the emails off, like close the door, really let yourself focus in on writing that document that needs to get done, and get to the emails later. This kind of monotasking can help us. Another thing about multitasking is not only do we do these tasks less well than we would if we did them by themselves, there's also an emotional exhaustion that occurs. So if you find yourself very tired when you're trying to multitask, it's an exhausting task to task switch. So I encourage you all to try monotasking and see how that is for you. And so what does that look like? What does it mean to maybe bring our full attention to a task, right? We're even multitasking, I think, when we're doing a task, but thinking about what's next. And I think that this often happens even with simple tasks that we're doing, like washing our hands, right? So we go to wash our hands, but are we really washing our hands? We might be, but often we're thinking about what we're going to do afterward. And so, when you think about really the purpose of hand washing, it's been relevant always, but now more than ever, right? To get germs off. But how do people typically wash their hands, right? I think hand hygiene has been changing recently, but typically before the pandemic, it might be just, turn the water on, wash them real quick, get some soap suds on there, and then go out the door. So we've worked with this with kids in the classroom. We've also integrated a mindful hand washing exercise meditation with nurses at UCI Medical Center in research that I did several years ago. And so I'm going to walk you through it if you'd like to participate. And maybe we can do this since we're not all sitting in front of a sink. We can pretend. So, whatever sink you happen to be at most often, when you walk up to that sink, I want you to imagine it. And also, let's start with our intentions, right? When we walk up to the sink, really reminding ourselves that we're here to get the germs off, right? And then however you turn the water on, right? And putting your hands under, and with mindfulness, remember, going back to our bodies, we can feel the water washing over our hands, right? And we can start to get some soap and begin to make a lather and really feel how that is to sort of give ourselves a little massage. And then the kids remind me to not let the water keep running right now. So we'll turn it off and save our water. And I ask the kids to show me when they wash their hands how they do it. So they show me, that they're rubbing their palms together. But then we ask, well, okay, remember our intentions. It's to get germs, and are the germs only there? So then they'll start, going between their fingers or the back of their hands, right? Under their nails, maybe even their wrists, right? When we're thinking of our intention, we begin to wash our hands differently. And we can also do this with something called heartfulness, which is a part of mindfulness. So we can, say silently to ourselves or out loud, I am taking care of myself and I am taking care of my community. Because truly, by washing our hands in this way, we are caring for ourselves and each other. And then we, turn the water back on, feel the water washing the soap suds away and watch them wash down the drain. And then turn it off and dry our hands however we do that. And, maybe even smelling the clean scent of our hands. And I know we walked through this slowly. I know we're not going to take 5 minutes to wash our hands. But what I encourage you to try is, notice where your mind is when you're washing your hands. And if it's not on hand washing, see if you can come back and try a few of these, components that we just integrated into this. The nurses that we did research with started to say that, imagine how many times a day they're having to wash their hands. Well, it became the place in their workplace where they were taking time for themselves. They would go and it was like, this is for me. This hand washing experience is my time to meditate, my time to reduce my stress, right? Because often when we're practicing mindfulness, that's what happens. So I encourage you to try it. And the study also shows that it improves hand hygiene. Okay, so back to our guiding light. And the final piece is that we can pay attention to creating a heart-centered existence. So this is the Chinese character for mindfulness, which is made up of 2 symbols. The top part represents a shelter, meaning presence, and the bottom represents the word heart. So really, I think that mindfulness is not only about our minds and where our minds are, it's about our hearts. And in fact, one of our mindfulness instructors recently told me a story about some research being done, and some researchers went out to study mindful meditation, and they were studying it with monks. And they wanted to connect some, measurements and connect some things to their head to do some measurements. And the monks were laughing and saying, like, no, like it would be, you would want to measure our heart, not our head. So this is, I think, a very important thing to keep in mind with mindfulness. And in fact, the practices, have a lot of compassion that are integrated into them. And it's even given rise to a whole separate class. So, there's many different mindfulness classes, and John Kabat-Zinn, who I mentioned earlier, developed one called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, or Mbsr, which is taught around the world, and including at UC Irvine. And thousands of people have taken this class, and another class has sort of come out of this class, built by 2 psychologists, researchers. One's on the West Coast, one's on the East Coast, and they developed the Mindful Self-Compassion class. And this is an 8-week class where we learn to bring kindness and compassion to ourselves. And there's science behind this. So, if you like, we can do one final exercise together. This one is called the Self-Compassion Break. And I invite you to try this with me. So kind of get comfortable wherever you are. And you might want to close your eyes or bring your gaze downward. And maybe take a few moments to recall a recent time that you've experienced stress. There might be a lot of possibilities for all of us. I encourage you, maybe don't pick something that's extremely stressful, that's going to be overwhelming to think about right now. Maybe more one that's bringing up a moderate amount of stress. And let's sort of, I know this isn't very mindful, but I'm going to have a sort of time travel back to that time, if possible, to pretend like we're meeting that suffering right now. And so a self-compassion break has 4 steps to it. And the first step is just acknowledging that we are experiencing a moment of suffering. So in a moment like that, we can just say, you know, I am suffering. And then recognizing our common humanity. So the second step is making statements such as, suffering is a part of life, or I am not alone. And it's not to minimize what we're going through, it's to connect to the suffering that is a part of our lives. And the third step is incorporating gentle touch. So you might try by placing a hand or both hands over your heart. If that doesn't feel like a good place to have them, you can try touching your cheeks, you know, your arms, your legs, you know, wherever touch feels right to you and comforting to you. And really letting yourself feel your own gentle touch. And the fourth step is offering supportive messages to yourself. So verbalizations, they could be out loud or to yourself. Maybe something like, may I learn to accept what I cannot change, or may I be kind to myself. May I be kind to myself. So notice how you feel, and when you're ready, open your eyes. And I thought I'd just share a little bit more about like some of the research that's happening. So Doctors Kristen Neff and Christopher Germer are the 2 who developed this whole class with an array of practices. And it's really, they begin by the class by examining how we speak to ourselves versus how we really speak to beloved family or friends when they're suffering. And it's quite a striking difference for most people. The way in which we meet someone else's suffering and the way we meet our own. For many of us, we actually don't speak very kindly to ourselves, and we often beat ourselves up. And we don't employ the same methods as we would for someone else. And there's a whole system of caregiving called the Mammalian caregiving system. So mammals do this where they, you know, you can see them with their young, whether it be an animal in the wild or a person with their maybe crying baby, right? You know, usually when a baby is crying, like the caregiver will go pick them up, right? So there's touch, right? Maybe rock them, maybe speak to them kindly. But we haven't really been taught to do this to ourselves. And yet we can learn how to do this to ourselves. And when we do, it's fascinating some of the things that they're finding. They're measuring cortisol levels, which is our stress hormone. By just placing a hand on ourselves, our cortisol levels go down. Our oxytocin levels rise, which is our love hormone. We can change what is happening in our body by bringing compassion to ourselves when we're suffering. And I took this class over a year ago at UC Irvine, and I thought I knew a lot about doing these things, and I realized I didn't know very much at all. I learned so many different new methods to bring self-compassion to my own suffering. So we also, by the way, have a class for teens on this. So let's see, I'm going to come back to our star, the guiding light in dark times, that when we pay attention to our thoughts, to our body, our behavior, our emotions, and to cultivating a heart-centered existence, we are utilizing evidence based mindfulness practice to nurture our well-being. And this guiding light lies within each of us and can shine bright even in the midst of these dark times. The only thing that is needed is a practice that consists of paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. So these last few minutes, I'm going to move into just some resources that we have at UCI's Susan Samueli Integrative Health Institute. And this is an image of our a new building going up on the corner of Bison and California, kind of near the Eye Institute. It's currently under construction. I think it will open in fall 2022. And the Susan Samueli Integrative Health Institute will be a part of this, is already a part of the College of Susan and Henry Samueli College of Health Sciences, but we will actually be physically located in this building. Currently, our main clinic is in Costa Mesa. We also have satellite clinics in Yorba Linda, Newport Beach, the Pacific Breast Care Center. So there's many places that you can find us. And we do integrative health. So we in the clinic, there are naturopathic doctors, we have acupuncturists, massage therapists, yoga therapists, many different kinds of services to help people stay healthy. And in terms of mindfulness, one of the things I wanted to share is that we are doing free weekday drop-in live stream meditations. So Monday through Friday. And if you go to our website, which I'll share at the very end, the very front banner is actually about these free live streams, and you can click on it and register, and you can feel free to join us. They're 25-minute meditations, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays at noon, Tuesdays and Thursdays at 5 o'clock. And we have, you can come once, you can come every day, and you can have your camera on or off. And, you know, people usually say hi at the beginning if they want to, and then there's a 25-minute meditation and a little debrief at the end for those who want to speak. And it's really building a beautiful community, and we hope you can join us, and feel free to share this resource with others too, to pass it along. The more the merrier. And I also wanted to share about our virtual mindfulness classes and workshops. So everything is virtual right now. And we're doing the mindfulness-based stress reduction class in Mbsr that I mentioned is taught worldwide, that John Kabat-Zinn developed in the 1970s. It's the class with the most research around it, supporting mindfulness. We've got mindful self-compassion for adults and for teens. We have a separate class for teens, both of which are coming up. We just recently hired about a year ago, Deidre Hughes, an instructor who does our teen programs, and she's amazing. I call her the teen whisperer. I signed my son up for a class last summer, and he loved it. We are also doing mindfulness and relapse prevention, mindful parenting programs. We have Miriam Bluth has recently joined us, and she just did a program called Awakening in Nature. And I know this might sound strange. How do you do that? Virtually, but you can. You actually can. And we got amazing feedback from this first class, and she has another one coming up in May, where people do have their laptops and they maybe go out on a balcony or sit by a window near plants, or go in a yard if they have access to this, and do meditations out in nature. And we have other teen programs as well. Another one called Project Wayfinder, which is really about helping teens to kind of find their purpose in life through meditation and reflection. So we're so excited about all of these offerings and hope that you can join us. We have, we'll post some of those flyers at the end, and also share our website. Here is our website. It's ssihi.uci.edu, ssihi.uci.edu. So we'd love to see you, and I just wish you all the very best during these surreal times we've been living in. It's certainly been quite a year, and I have hope that things are getting better. I hope that you do too. And if there's anything that we can do to support you with your well-being during this time, please let us know. And I thank you for your presence during this talk. Take good care.